through it. But what I'll do here is I will I will share, if I can remember how to do that. Looks like some things moved around here. So I'm not seeing the share button.
I have a present now at the bottom toolbar on my computer. I don't know if you have that.
No, I do. Okay, thank you. And sorry, it's not coming up for me. Let me try something different.
Okay, if it's a problem, Mike, I can always project and you can talk to it. Just tell me where to go.
Yeah, let me. I have two monitors, and it's not coming up on my items on my second monitor are not coming up. So let me just try this. Yeah, I'm not finding it. Matt, do you mind projecting?
Nope. Just give me a second. Not a problem. Can you see my screen now?
I can.
With standard 1, instructional leadership?
Right. Yep.
Okay.
So, I'll talk over, the standards that we've already reviewed very briefly because there weren't, I didn't make many changes to them. With standard 1, I think I made, I'm not sure that I've made any changes with the exception of perhaps a word or two. If in standard 2, I believe was a bulleted list. And, what I try to do there is just make it more of a narrative format. And in some cases, just consolidated points across bullets. I don't know if you want me to read what we have for bullet 2, but again, those were the nature of the changes that I made for standard 2.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't see anybody saying yes, read it. So, okay. For standard 3, similarly, I don't think there were any changes with the exception of perhaps a word or two, and same is true for standard 4. So if we go down to, and what's, mostly new here are the section on progress towards goals. And so following the same pattern that we've used before, indicating what the individual scores or levels or ratings were for each of the goals. And if we go down to the narrative, would it be helpful? And again, I know that this is new. I typically don't like reading to people, but would it be helpful for me to read the comments aloud so that we're all coming from the same place, or do people have a chance to?
I think it would be helpful if it's new compared to the standards 1 through 4.
Sure. So that I'll go ahead and read it. Excuse me. I'm going to take a sip of water. All right. So under the goals, members indicated that while progress was made with respect to each goal, and there has been noticeable progress recently, greater focus is needed in varying degrees. This is evident in the low number of MET ratings across the goals. Several members acknowledged that great progress was made in the adaptation of technology as it was a necessary component of remote learning. Nonetheless, members lauded the administration for flexible use and distribution of Chromebooks and adoption of other learning tools and hope that best practices can be leveraged in the future. The committee wants to see more work in incorporating best practices into an overall technology plan that informs a strategic vision. Submembers acknowledge that progress has been made with respect to communications and discussions on diversity. However, many members only indicated some progress and believe more work is needed in this area, including the development of a concrete plan with bold aspirations and links action to impact on professional culture for staff and students. Members identified that significant progress has been made over the course of the year in the quantity of communication from the district to families, mostly by way of weekly newsletters. While members appreciated the use of surveys in concept, many of the surveys lack sufficient detail to serve their intended purpose. As mentioned across many of the standard narratives, members wish to see more effort in forms of two-way communication with multiple stakeholders. Members were most concerned over the lack of progress on the development of a student retention plan. While it was noted that a survey was recently sent to determine which students might return to the district, several members indicated that this attempt alone falls very short of developing an understanding of why students are leaving the district. Members encourage the superintendent and the administration to pursue this question with greater rigor to determine what steps or changes can be considered to minimize students and families leaving the school district. Thoughts, questions, concerns on the narrative?
I have one piece just on that last section, and it's really just a tiny quibble. I would question just about the saying that members were most concerned over the lack of progress on the developmental. I think that it was a large concern for that goal, but I don't know if that goal's progress was the largest concern of the 4 goals, if that makes sense.
So when I went through the aggregation of the comments, and if I look across to what was mentioned most, by far, across all goals, no plan to address retention and understand why students are leaving the district was mentioned the most amongst members. And I think that there were 3, 6, 9 or 10 members that mentioned it in their narrative on goals. So,
right. I guess what I would wonder, though, is if that means that that's the goal they found most important. I mean, like I said, it's a quibble. So, but I don't know if, because it wasn't phrased that way to the membership of, which goal is the most important to you or something like that, that I would suggest
so what we
maybe
can say, Linda, is most members,
concern.
Yeah, most members expressed concern, or the most members, something like that. I understand what you're saying, and I think that that's a minor tweak.
Thanks.
So I can make that, I can do it on the fly here. I can bring it up.
Okay. Eric, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
All right, then we could probably go down to the overall summative rating. So again, we have the overall summative rating and the impact on student learning, and I'll read this as well. So actually, if you can just scroll down a little bit, that'll reduce the scrolling later on. Yeah, oops. There we go. Just one more down. Oh, the other way, sorry. All right, that's good. We recognize and acknowledge the degree of difficulty posed to educational leaders as a result of the COVID-19 global pandemic. The logistical challenges are further complicated by the size and geographic expanse across our district towns, as well as the lean central office staff supporting the district. With those challenges in mind, the ability to think creatively, being proactive, not reactive, and strong leadership was acutely necessary. Much of the work that was done in the fall could have been done or planned in the summer and weeks before the start of school, as many other school districts did. The superintendent did not rise to the occasion in these areas. The lack of timely planning, communication, and articulation of a vision all contributed to an erosion of confidence amongst teachers, families, and school committee members. The formation of a reopening task force was an example of a creative and collaborative idea that was under-leveraged and utilized. The use of a weekly newsletter and surveys increased the quantity of communication, but were often underinformed, redundant, or did not fully serve its purpose. The overall summative ratings, as well as the impact on student learning, represent low water marks for the superintendent. In addition to the handling of the district's COVID response, many members felt that the lack of evidence as articulated in the evaluation rubric was not communicated to the committee. This includes providing evidence of how the superintendent's actions or leadership influence educational outcomes. Members who have generally rated proficient or higher point to an improvement in communication in March and April, as well as clearer planning, which led to a return to full in-person learning for those who chose it. The following chart shows the percentage of members who have provided an overall rating of proficient or higher over the past 5 years. 2017, 85%. 2018, 80%. 2019, 69%. 2020, 58%. 2021, 32%. The steep downward trend in overall rating is cause for concern and underlies areas for improvement that remain unaddressed even prior to the pandemic. We encourage the superintendent to create an inflection point by reflecting upon the past year and generating and implementing lessons learned by adopting a framework of data-based decision-making focused on driving specific and measurable student outcomes, by broadening his communication platform across all stakeholders so that they feel that their perspectives are heard, by deepening a commitment to diversity and inclusivity planning, and by building upon the communication and planning efforts demonstrated in the last 2 months. Questions, thoughts, concerns?
Is that last paragraph intended to be like the instruction forward, or is there more to it than that? Or I guess kind of what comes of this from, action steps, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I don't know that our evaluation typically calls for an action step. It's I think providing some guidance for areas where people have indicated that there is a need for improvement going forward, and some of those areas are trends that have spanned multiple years.
Okay, so after we deliver this report, it's basically on superintendent to come up with deliverables based on the information we provide.
Deliverables based on the information we provide, but also, and I think those are to be formed, but also for the next evaluation cycle, for the evaluation committee to take this information and use it to formulate the next year's superintendent goals.
Yep. Okay.
And keep in mind, Eric, as part of the goals, you have your standards and substandards. So what the evaluation subcommittee might do in the future is take a look at those substandards that might be more impacted by some of the feedback and might align goals to those in the future, or change course of direction on the substandards depending on what areas might need to be a focus point for the superintendent. I see a couple hands. Linda, you're first on my screen, so I'll just go in that order, and Eileen, you're next.
So I have a couple kind of initial impressions. So I didn't have a chance to read through it before the meeting. So this is fairly just in the moment reaction. But I guess I would ask about how the members, there were some members who gave an overall exemplary rating. There were 5 who gave a proficient rating. And there was quite a lot of positive feedback and positive themes that I saw across. And I wonder if they have a place in the overall summary at the end. All of the members put effort into do their evaluations, to write their comments, and I think it would be only fair to include that portion of the membership's words and their take on this evaluation cycle. So that's where what I came away with it, just that initial reaction of that. I also wondered about with the chart, along with that, I would be curious to know how much school committee overturn happened in those years. And I wonder if that kind of changes what the superintendent can do with that chart for next year, and forming the goals with the next year's subcommittee and that kind of process forward. I don't know if that makes sense for how we look at this. Again, this is my first year on the subcommittee, so these are just my initial reactions.
Yeah. So I'll if I can, Matt, address the second one first. So in last year's evaluation, there was reference made to the rating and the trend of the rating going down from one year to the next. And so it's not without precedent. And in fact, I think it's an important data point that's being articulated here. And in this case, it's simply data. There's going to be turnover in the school committee every year. And I'm not sure, I think that's implied. I think that's understood. To the first point, there was one exemplary.
Can I just break in really quick on that, on what I was meaning with that point, if you don't mind? Just so this year in particular, we've had way more turnover mid-year in between terms, I think, than other years, and that it would affect, I would think, how someone can take the outcome from one evaluation to another. Each committee is going to be focusing on different aspects. So I mean, and I apologize for taking up time. I just want to be careful that we're kind of looking at a well-rounded view of the situation we're in. And so that's where I'm at of just wanting to make sure that we're careful about how we deliberate.
I think
this is I'm sorry, go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, if I could just add, I understand the point, Linda. I think from an evaluation timeline perspective, we look at the beginning of the year to the end of the year and conduct an evaluation. Now, what we have done in the past is looked at a trend as to how that relates to years in the past with the same guidelines of starting point and end point. And I think last year's evaluation, and I can just speak for the precedent that was set last year, there was concern amongst the overall committee and the subcommittee that although the overall majority, as you saw, over 50% gave a proficient rating, the trend in years in the past has been generally a downward trend. So that's why it was noted that this is of concern, that although the overall rating majority says proficient, the trend is not trending in a way that would show growth and development. So I think this year is actually the first year that a vast majority is now on the needs improvement side and the unsatisfactory. So that is reiterating that trend is something that has not changed the course of direction, regardless of the membership in the committee. The evaluation process is consistent. We have the same way of aggregating, the same way of of evaluating the superintendent. So although this year didn't look at past performance as part of the evaluation this year, it is a point in time to measure that against previous years. So, I mean, I understand that we need to be careful about bringing that into it, but it is there at some point, there has to be a culmination to say, here's where we are with the superintendent's evaluation, and here's how it relates to a historical perspective. I don't know if that helped or hindered.
Yeah, no, it does help. It's just wanting to be clear on the process, because the goal of this, right, is to improve professional practice in the next cycle, right? I mean, that's, and thereby bring the district forward as well, right? So I just wanted to make sure that that's still the focus. And so asking questions where I see them. So thank you.
Makes sense.
So to address your first point, Linda, I do think it's fair to have a paragraph here, and it will probably be in the second paragraph, where I collect the, I think, some of the positive developments, things like, I think we do mention technology, but if we don't, mentioning technology and ventilation systems, we did mention the improvement in communication over the last couple of months. But I think that I can curate some of the positive contributions that were made and offer a paragraph in here that gives mention to them again. I think that's fair.
I think Aileen had something, right?
I do, yeah. Is that all right to speak now? Yeah. Thank you, Eric. I just attended the MTA annual conference this past weekend, and there was a proposed amendment that actually passed at the conference where the MTA will be changing its name from the Massachusetts Teachers Association to the Massachusetts Educators Association, because teachers isn't all encompassing for everyone that's part of the MTA. So when going over this statement, I noticed in the paragraph that starts off, the lack of timely planning, communication, articulation of a vision will all contributed to an erosion of confidence amongst teachers, families, and school committee members. I don't want to presume that like, say, paraprofessionals and nurses and everything like that had a lack of confidence too, but I think that's what you were trying to get at when you said teachers. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention to see if maybe we can include staff or educators. I'm not quite sure. I'm trying
to know educators.
Can I ask a question about what year did Daryl start? Do you know? Does that chart? It goes back to 17, right? That's not the beginning of his tenure, right?
It's not.
Okay. Because it looked like, if you just look at the numbers just on the surface without knowing anything else, right? The first 2 years look pretty consistent, right? Pretty good numbers, 85, what was it, 85, 80 or something like that.
Right.
And then it's a little bit of a tweaking the next year, and then it's a precipitous drop off after. And just looking strictly at the numbers, you wonder, obviously the pandemic, influenced this year for sure, but what happened last year and what was the start of the decline? And is the purpose of this to reference some of the points that went into those numbers, I guess is what I'm asking?
Yeah, I think that there are some consistent themes around the focus on creating educational vision, educational outcomes, on communication, on establishing an educational vision that have been consistent themes in the past few years. And so those things are still coming through in evaluations. And I think that those things are also baked into the results that we've seen over the last few years.
Linda?
So, building off of Eric's question, I guess, what would be, so why 2017 for starting the chart? Is it just because it's 5 years? Is it a specific, like what happens if we look at 2016, 2015?
Simply haven't gone back that far.
Yeah, I just,
I'm not sure that I have access to the data to go back that far. I went back to the data that I had access to.
oh, okay, yeah. No, I just, again, you know, when you're making a chart, right, you want to make sure that your endpoints make sense for what you're trying to convey. And so if it, I think, I guess I just don't recall seeing a chart like this in last year's. Maybe I'm just misremembering. And so I am a little bit hesitant without checking the years prior to 2017 to just to be sure that we're not implying something that isn't that we don't know. You know, we should know.
I guess what would be
Yeah,
what is
what
it
would
that we
be-
don't know
yeah.
prior to 2017 that we think is important to know in order to convey this information?
Well, I guess what I would be wondering about is if there was a climb, right? If there was a climb up to proficient, to a higher percentage of proficient, then that would be good information for knowing, you know, what that with guidance or something like that, something in the past had been helpful for bringing up the percentage of proficiency. I think that would be useful to know. I mean, I'm fine with hearing counterpoints to that.
So
Yeah, well, I think
I
it
would
might be
just,
helpful.
can I just
No,
say
I'm not sure
something,
that's
Mike?
necessary, no.
Yeah,
I'm
can I
sorry.
just, yeah, just a counterpoint, and I don't want to belabor this. I mean, we can certainly look at the details of past reviews, but I can say this subcommittee has been around. I think this is the 3rd year of this subcommittee. And prior to this subcommittee, we were lucky to get 50% of the school committee to complete an evaluation. So I would suspect that if you went back to 2015, 2016, that you're not going to see 20 out of 22 members as having completed an evaluation. You're going to see 8, 10 members. You're going to even see some members give exemplary across the board without any comments at all. So there's not a lot of statistical relevance in the older evaluation subset. I'm happy to look at those, but that was kind of the scenario that we've been in the last 3 years. I think this year it was 20 or 21 people completed it. The year before, 21 out of 22. The year before that, 20 out of 22. So I think we're in a better spot that we have more statistical relevance now. But I do also want to go back to 5 years. Like 5 years is a good analysis of a trend. So even if we went back 7 years, it's either going to show that the number was higher and it continued to go down, or it went up and it's gone down. I think the key is the last 5 years, there has not been a movement back upwards, right? And it's not being careful of conveying a message. That is what it is. That's what the data tells us. Now, the data does not tell the whole story. The whole story is told within the comments, within the concerns. And I recall last year's evaluation may not have had a chart in the exact nature, but it referenced those exact statistics, right? And it talked about that trend. So
I hear you on where you're coming from, and I agree. I don't want to belabor this. I guess I just was put off a little bit by having a chart in what the intention of the chart is. What is that going to bring about in professional practice for the future? I mean, he's already seeing that he's gone from proficient to needs improvement overall, and so perhaps it it gets the message across enough to have it in the summary. but I mean, I don't want to belabor it. So my feeling was a little bit that it was a little bit off-putting for what he would then do with that information and what the public would then do with the information that a sentence of declining in the percentage of proficiency ratings wouldn't do.
Yeah, so this is kind of back to my, and expands on what Linda said, is I don't know if it makes sense to reference the themes that we've seen during that period that's referenced in the list, I guess, of whether that makes sense, right? So I mean, just looking at it, you can see the first 2 years are quite good, right? And then something changed in 19 where I don't know if the purpose of this review is specific to just this year, which might change the way we present that information, or if it's a historical reference point and just showing the trend in decline, which also makes sense. But maybe we need to carry out the recurring themes that you mentioned, Mike, through some of the narrative here at the end. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I try to do that at the end by talking and focusing on those things that, again, the last sentence here, the last paragraph was, we need an inflection point. We need to reverse the trend. And here's how. Here are the things to focus on. And those were the things that were recurring that I mentioned before.
Okay.
So I did try to do that in the last paragraph. And, the question about, is it important to point out that there is a trend line here? Whether we do it as a chart or whether we do it as a narrative, that's the essential question. And I mean, I leave that for discussion. I happen to think that's an important piece of information. That was information that was, was relevant in last year's evaluation. But I think that's an essential question to what we're talking about here, and it's certainly open for further discussion.
Just from my point of view, I think it's valuable. Yep.
I think it could be summed up in a sentence rather than a chart and get the same point across in a useful way. I don't know how much more information we're getting out of having the percentages versus a steady trend down.
Well, I think it points to the magnitude of the trend down. But I guess the point is, if others feel that doing that or pointing out the trend in narrative form is more palatable than a chart, I'm certainly happy to modify that.
It might be that I'm the only one who wants a narrative versus a chart, and I'm okay being the odd one out. So,
I mean, I'm a believer in both. I believe you need data to back your narrative, and I think that it helps define that narrative. And one of the things that the data points do for me is, if I see proficient 3 years in a row before, the data points give me an analysis of what that was trending towards, as opposed to just a flat baseline of proficient. To me, it's tough to get an evaluation where someone says you need improvement. But if you're the recipient of that evaluation, you want that detail of where you need to improve and what you need to focus on. So I think just putting in a sentence is okay, but it doesn't really identify, well, this is what the trend has shown, and that is for an individual to figure out a way to change that trend, right? And I mean, it's not one person evaluating, it's 20 or 22 individuals evaluating. So there's a lot of useful information in that evaluation that could perhaps reverse those trends pretty quickly and pretty efficiently.
So I think we can relate the data in a way that is more narrative than chart. And I think narrative is more conversational. I think the rest of what we try to do in the rest of the evaluation is have it be more narrative. And I think that we can take the chart away, but reference the data in a narrative format.
Yeah, I guess if you're finding a way to capture the trend, which I guess is the most important thing, well, maybe one of the key parts of this in describing what we think the trend is, what's contributing to that trend, that might be, you know, a big benefit here.
Mm-hmm.
It's up to you guys. And to be honest with you, that when you went through that chart, I was like, that stood out the most as the most impactful, I guess, from my point of view, just seeing that decline. So I don't know if putting it in a narrative, we're not trying to be impactful. We're just trying to demonstrate issues and then reasons for them. So like Linda said, improvement can happen. So as long as that occurs one way or another, that's the goal of what we're doing anyways.
Right. Agree.
One quick note, and that Matt, when you said about how it's been an overall proficient, like having that highlight of all of these years it's been proficient, but then looking at the percentages, I think that is that does kind of move the needle for me a little bit more. But also, you know, I had brought up in passing before about a note from the MASC guidance that said that superintendents have, in order to be rated proficient overall, need to have a proficient rating on instructional leadership. And I don't know if that's been followed. I don't know how recent that is in the guidance. I don't know, but that stood out to me as something that would kind of have a place in this kind of retrospective of the past 5 years. And I don't know if that's just throwing in something out of left field, but that was something that I came across when I was looking through the MASC guidance for aggregating superintendent evaluations. I don't know if that's something you guys have come across before. Guessing no.
I mean, I'm not sure I'm connecting the dots on that point, Linda. So, you know, if I guess help me understand, if you would, how or why it would be relevant to point out that requirement here.
Because I don't believe it was met last year.
Okay. But so
hang on. Last year's guidance was, if you were going to give needs improvement, it would be proficient because of the pandemic.
Okay.
Last year's guidance was completely thrown out the window by DESE because of the pandemic. They kind of altered the scale, so to speak.
Thank you. That was the piece of information I was having trouble completing the picture. So I'll be quiet now.
So Mike, I think you've heard kind of from the committee that there's probably a way to not just have the chart without talking to it. And I think there are some concerns there in the data trend. So perhaps having some more of a narrative to that it has been proficient. We've seen this trend. It's at needs improvement now, and perhaps that's a call to action in some capacity going forward in the future.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess the big question is, and DESE doesn't give us guidance for this. MASC doesn't give us guidance for it. There's got to be a way to connect an evaluation from one year to the next, right? So it's a single point in time, it's an end point, but there are always going to be certain pieces of the evaluation that might carry over and influence goals towards the next year. Go ahead, Mike, you were going to say something.
Well, I guess two things. One, I was going to sum up a couple of the changes that we talked about, but you know, to speak to the point, I think that there's context, and you know, I think that the context that I'm belaboring the point, but I think that the context, the committee judged that context was important last year. And I think the same holds true this year. But again, I think we can address that in a narrative way instead of a chart. So, you know, the items that I have was I have another paragraph to weave in on the summative evaluation. We're going to change teachers to educators, and we're going to translate the chart into a narrative. First of all, is there anything that I missed? Okay. There may be just some very minor grammar-ish kinds of things as I go through and do a final cleanup. Hopefully nobody's opposed to that. Okay.
We typically will read this entire summative evaluation at full school committee. Are you intending on reading every component, including the standards, Mike, or just the end component?
No, I'm intending to read all of it. So there's narrative all across all 4 standards, as well as the goals and the summative. So that's all of that will be read.
Okay. Do you need help reading? Not do you need help, but would it help if other members of the subcommittee broke that up to change the tone, the pace of that, or are you okay with doing it at full school committee, all of it inclusive?
I will leave that to you folks. I can go either way. I'm sure people don't need to hear me drone on and reading, so breaking it up would at least not have me drone on.
I'm willing to help break it up if other people want to. I'd kind of leave that up to the committee here, but I'm happy to help if that helps you.
I mean, one way to do it would be for people to read the sections that they authored in draft format.
We could do that if people were
That's
okay
fine
with
by
that.
me.
Yep, it's fine.
So you can, Mike, you can pick up standard 4 and then take it to the end. Is that fair?
I'll bring it home.
Okay. Cool. Linda, I saw your hand go up too.
Yeah, I had 2 questions. In previous evaluations, there have been those handy dandy pie charts. Do those need to come back in, or were they found to be not that useful? And then a question of
I don't know who created them.
Yeah, I don't know
Yeah,
either.
I don't know who created them, and I didn't find them particularly handy or helpful. So I will leave that to you folks. If you think that we need to have pie charts, we can seek them out, I suppose. But no, my intention was to not include them.
I have no opinion either way on that. But I had one other question. I don't know if the others are weighing in on pie charts. So after assuming that the full committee accepts this evaluation, right? This goes before the full committee as a motion, if I recall correctly.
Mhm.
Then what happens next with delivering a needs improvement rating versus a proficient? Does the committee need to create or collaborate on like a guiding plan or something like that? It's delivered, and then at the reorganization, the new subcommittee takes it from there with Daryl, or
There's no preconceived formula for what happens from there. It's up to the committee to determine if there are things, if the committee determines that they would like to see whatever. You can run the gamut of different things that one could envision, but that's really up to the committee to determine if there's something there that they'd like to see.
One comment might be more for the broader committee meeting, but I feel like we're part, even though this is an evaluation of Daryl, that we're somewhat responsible for his performance, just in general. And so I'm wondering if that would necessitate some sort of further discussion about clear expectations now versus another cycle where we define the goals more formally. I don't know if that question makes sense, but I feel like we have maybe a responsibility around even the trend, for example. What was our role in that, I guess, is the way I'm thinking about it. And what do we own as part of the future moving forward? What do you think?
I'm not sure. I think I'm following you, Eric, and I think that that's a question for, for future reflection and discussion. There's a question of the evaluation and delivery of the evaluation, and then there's the question of the so what, right? And I think you're asking about the so what. And again, I don't know. I mean, I think that it's a conversation that can be worthwhile, but it's not my intention for it to be the focus of our conversation tomorrow night.
Got it.
If I can, I know that other school committees do self-evaluation of the committee. And that's something that I wonder if that might serve our school committee well to incorporate in the future. It's at this point, I don't think it makes sense to embark on it as we're about to reorganize. But there's a lot of resources that MASC has developed too, checklists, surveys, and what to do next. And it's pretty similar to what we just did for the superintendent, but just directed at the school committee. And I think that would help would help a lot to kind of get an idea of what our role is. Because I hear where you're coming from, Eric, on the committee's role. Some of the comments that I had seen reading through are like the infrequent updates from the consultant, but the committee voted to not have that as part of the motion in the, what was it, or was it approval of who was hired? There were just these pieces that got taken out of that motion for hiring the consultant that was amended by us.
That motion specifically called for the superintendent to provide weekly reports, either verbally or in writing, to the school committee. So he never did that. He didn't provide weekly reports. And that was what was passed in that motion, right? So regardless of whether or not the school committee agreed to or had to approve of the hiring was supposed to happen and reports were supposed to be provided. And I think that's the basis of an evaluation, is whether or not the superintendent had evidence to show that he provided reports on a weekly basis and updates. And to my knowledge, and I'll share this with you, I emailed the superintendent before I wrote my evaluation, and I said, this was on the motion that passed, and it says weekly reports. Do you have evidence of weekly reports? And he ghosted me for 6 days. And on the 7th day, he responded and said, I provided those updates when Dr. Meade Montague joined the school committee at the meeting. So we had 2 meetings with her presenting, and to him that covered weekly updates. So to me, when something's in black and white writing in terms of here's what you're going to do from guidance and you don't do it, at some point when evaluation comes around and someone says, did you do it? Either you did or you didn't.
So perhaps this is a bad example for what I'm trying to get at, but there are actions that the school committee takes that kind of takes away our teeth, right? That's what I'm at. That's what I'm looking at, is that, you know, I don't have that motion right in front of me to remember, but I remember coming away thinking we just voted away our oversight or amended away, right? That was what happened in that, in my point of view.
Yeah, I think that
Without
was almost
looking
the
at it.
election of the consultant in
Right.
particular.
Right. So I guess what I'm saying is that I think that there is a role for a self-evaluation of the, or a committee self-evaluation in the future that we should consider. And maybe it's not in this subcommittee, but I think, I mean, of course, the other alternative measure is the ballot box. So
That's
but
the thing. I mean, I do want to continue the discussion on the superintendent. I'll object to that, Linda, because my goal is not to evaluate you. It's not to evaluate Eric. It's not to evaluate Mike Dennis. It's not to evaluate the school committee. My goal is to come as a member, deliberate, have an informed decision as a committee, and let my constituents make their mind up at the ballot box. It's not for us to evaluate the role of the school committee, because that's why we're elected public officials. That's not the role of the subcommittee or the school committee to evaluate how we're doing. The public evaluates that.
You know, along those lines, what I'd offer is this, and I think I agree with a little bit of each of you, right? You know, I don't know about self-evaluation, but what I do think it could be healthy for organizations in general is a bit of retrospective, right? What is it that what is it that went well? What is it that didn't go well? What is it that we want to do more of? And Eric's kind of grinning because he knows where I'm coming from. But you know, I do think I think that process can provide that feedback loop that can inform how we do things going forward, and the process going forward, without putting a value on the school committee as a whole, right? Because I think that's
right.
an interesting thing to conceive of. Not impossible, but an interesting thing to conceive of when we're talking about, you know, a school committee such as ours.
Eileen?
Eileen has a interest.
Aileen, thank you. First, I just want to say thank you for taking my suggestion about the name change. I know I really appreciate it, coming from being not a member of the subcommittee. I appreciate that. Secondly, this is very eye-opening, this subcommittee, for me. It's really, really interesting. I really appreciate what you guys do, for sure. It's a very difficult job, but I can't believe all the time and energy you guys spend in doing this, and doing it very thoroughly. And third, I just have a question about, you will be presenting the evaluation, is it for tomorrow night's school committee meeting at 7 o'clock?
Yes.
Okay, great. And then after you present it, is it considered public, if you will?
Yes.
Oh, okay. And is the final draft, it's not really, that's kind of an oxymoronic, is the final edition made public or posted somewhere, or no?
So the final version will be, it'll be sent out for consideration amongst the school committee tomorrow, or tonight or tomorrow.
Yeah.
And then typically it'll be read.
Yep.
That is typically included as an attachment to the meeting minutes.
Okay.
So and for as a practical matter, I mean, that's public record. All of the individual evaluations are a matter of public record.
And that's accessible on the WRSD website?
The meeting minutes are.
Right. So if it's an attachment to that, then yes, I will be able to access that.
Yep.
All right, great. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Chair Dennis. I always wanted to say that. Chair Lavoie. Member Woodland.
So Mike, do you have enough direction to make those changes to be ready for tomorrow?
Yep, I think so.
Everybody's comfortable with, you'll share that out so people have their draft or their section on that to read. Everybody's comfortable with that? Eric, Linda? Okay. So if we're okay with that, we can move on to the next item on the agenda, which is just the approval of our minutes from the last meeting, and those should be attached to today's agenda. I'll give everyone a minute, and whenever people are ready, I'll take a motion if there is one.
I'll make a motion to approve minutes of April 29th, 2021.
I'll second that. So I'll go in roll call order of how I see everybody. Member Dennis?
Dennis, yes.
Member Knowlton?
Knowlton, yes.
Member Woodland?
Woodland, yes.
And Lavoie, yes, as well. So that actually concludes the items on our agenda. I do want to just ask this subcommittee. I know that we typically, will adjourn, we'll have the evaluation read, and then it's typically the reorg and then a new evaluation subcommittee. We start the process of going through goals, etc. There's a little while before our reorg, so I'll leave it up to this committee, and we can certainly continue the discussion in open session. But if we wanted to, depending on how tomorrow goes, if we wanted to convene and start to get ahead of goals for next year, we could do that before the reorg. So I'll just leave that out for food for thought, because I know this past year, the goals were not established until late in the year, and I'm a big believer that the earlier we can get goals in place, the better we can continue to move forward. So just food for thought. It might be pertinent to further discuss this tomorrow night, but if it is something that people want to do, I'm happy to continue moving the ball forward. So with that, I'll take I'll leave you all with that food for thought, and I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
All right, we'll go roll call vote in an exact hour, so perfect timing. Member Dennis?
Dennis, yes.
Member Knowlton?
Knowlton, yes.
Member Woodland?
Woodland, yes.
And Member Lavoie, yes. We'll see you all tomorrow night.
All right, thanks, everyone.
Have a wonderful night.
See you later.
Everyone.